Good day everyone, I am Joshua Gonzalez from Group 2. Me and my group mates are going to discuss evolution and the Philippine taxation o ang mga nilalaman ng Kabanata 4. Una na dito ang evolution of Philippine taxation. Pangalawa, taxation in the Spanish Philippines. Pangatlo, taxation under the Americans. Pang-apat, taxation during the Commonwealth period. At panglima, fiscal policy from 1946 to present. Sisimulan ko sa evolution of the Philippine taxation. Kailan nga ba nagsimula ang pagbubuwis sa ating bansa? Ayon sa pananaliksik ng task researcher ng Pilipinas, napapabatas ito sa Republic Act No. 221 noong Mayo 15, 1959 na lumikha ng Joint Legislative Executive Tax Commission or GLETC. Implemented taxation in the Philippines. The policy of taxation in the Philippines is governed chiefly by the Constitution of the Philippines and 3 Republic Acts. Constitution, Article 4, Section 28 of the Constitution states that the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable, and that Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. Philippine Constitution ang napatatag sa taxation. Because of this Constitution, it significantly contribute to all people in our country. Sabi nga dito, equitable, meaning lahat ng tao ay may binabayarang tax pero hindi equal na 1K lang ang tax kada tao ang binabayaran. Kumbaga, nabase din sa source of income ang tax ng isang tao. Let's take Manny Pacquiao as an example of it. Diba? Siya billions of money ang kinikita niya kada lalaban siya ng boxing, but hindi lahat ng yon ay nakukuha niya. Nagbabayad siya ng tax like siguro mga million pesos at ang binabayaran niya. On the other hand, tayong mga 7K a month lang ang mga taxes. Naaabot siguro sa 100 pesos or 1,000 ang tax na kinukuha sa atin ng government. May mission ang Congress na dapat mag-evolve ang tax dahil hawak nito ang improvement and development ng isang bansa. Because they implemented this tax in our country, nakakatamasa tayo ng free education, medication, free housing, and many more na makakatulong sa atin lalo na sa mahihirap na magpatuloy sa buhay kahit wala silang stable source of income. With the use of evolution of taxation, mai-improve din hindi lang ang economic system sa ating bansa ang makaka-benefit kundi pati na rin ang mga tao sa lipunan. Napaka-essential talaga na nag-e-evolve ang taxation para may kakayahan ang government na makaka-provide sila ng needs sa lipunan so that masosolve nila ang mga problema ng bansa with the use of it. Understand more the topic? Remember, taxes allow the government to perform and provide services that would not evolve naturally through a free market mechanism. For example, a public parks. Taxes are the primary source of revenue for most governments. Governments also use taxes to establish income equity and modify consumption decisions. That's all my report. I hope you learn about the evolution of the Philippine taxation. Thank you.
Good morning everyone, I am Clarice Curalde and today we will discuss the taxation in Spanish Philippines. The taxes imposed by Spanish period was compulsory for 2 reasons. First, as a recognition of Spain's sovereignty over the colonies, and second is to defray the expenses of pacification and governance thereafter. Now, let's discuss the types of taxes that Filipinos are obliged to pay. First is the tributo. Tributo was a general tax paid by the Filipinos to Spain which amounted 8 reales per year. Those who are required to pay are 16 to 60 years old, and other forms of payment can be gold, chicken, textile, cotton, and rice. But In 1884, tributo put to stop and replaced by the cedula or personal identification paper. The cedula was a certificate to identify the taxpayer. The payment of the cedula is progressive and according to income categories. This system, however, was a heavy burden for the peasants and was easy for the wealthy. This had to be carried all the time. A person who could not present his or her cedula to Guardia Civil could be detained for being indocumentado. The next one is the sanctorum. Sanctorum was a tax in the amount of 3 reales. These were required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of the churches and the purchase of materials for religious celebrations. The next one is the donativo. Donativo was the tax in the amount of half reales for the military campaign of the government against the Muslims. But in the later years, however, the amount collected from the donativo was almost exclusively used for the Spanish fort in Zamboanga. The next one is the caja de comunidad. Caja de comunidad was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or improvement of public buildings. The next one is the polo y servicio. It is a system of forced labor for 40 days a year but reduced 15 days in the year 1884 of men ranging 16 to 60 years old who were obligated to give personal services to community projects. One could be exempted from polo y servicio by paying your absence, which is another corrupt practice by Spanish falta, with a fine of 3 pesos per year. Those who rendered this public service were called polistas. With all these taxes that was imposed, there are people who are exempted to pay. Those are the alcaldes, gobernadores, cabezas de barangay, soldiers, members of civil guards, government officials, and vagrants. Why? Simply because as an award for their service. For further discussion about the taxation in Spanish Philippines, let's proceed to the second reporter.
Good day everyone, my name is Casey Joy de los Santos. Today I will be going to discuss the Mariano Herbosa rights to Rizal about taxes. Who is Mariano Herbosa? Mariano Herbosa, husband of Lucia Rizal Herbosa, fifth among the Rizal siblings, and the father of Delfina Rizal Herbosa. Birth date 1852, birthplace Calamba, Laguna, Philippines, death May 23, 1889, cause of death cholera. Corruption in the Philippines is not a 20th century invention. Rizal spoke lightly of it, in rich detail. In his correspondence and writings, specific names, places, and cases are mentioned, giving corruption in its woeful prey a human face. Letters between Rizal and his family and friends and his opponents are especially useful because they articulated what colonial reports silenced and what official numbers hid. Here's the letter of Mariano Herbosa to Rizal about taxes. The tax. With regard to your question on this, the answer is very long as it is the cause of the prevailing misery here. What I can write you will be the only one half of the story, and even Dumas Sr. cannot exhaust the subject. Nevertheless, I'll try to write what I can. Though may not be able to give a complete story, you may at least know half of it. Here, there are many kinds of taxes. What they call irrigated rice land, even if it has no water, must pay a tax of 50 kavains of palay and has rice, and land with 6 kavains of seed pay 5 pesos in cash. The land they call dry land that is planted to sugar cane, maize, and others pay different rates. Even if the agreed amount is 30 pesos for land with 6 kavains of seed, if they see that the harvest is good, they increase the tax, but they don't decrease it if the harvest is poor. There is land whose tax is 25 pesos or 20 pesos according to custom. The most troublesome are the residential lots in the town. There is no fixed rule that is followed, only their whim. Hence, even if it is only 1 span in size, if a stone wall is added, 50 pesos must be paid, the lowest being 20 pesos. But a nipa or kogon house pays only 1 peso for an area of 10 fathoms square. Another feature of this system is that on the day you accept the conditions, the contract will be written which cannot be changed for 4 years. But the tax is increased every year. For these reasons, for 2 years now, the payment of tax is confused, and little by little, the fear of the residents here of the word vacant is being dispelled, which our ancestors had feared so much. The result is bargaining, like they do in buying fish. It is advisable to offer a low figure and payment can be postponed. Unlike before when people were very much afraid to pay after May. I'm looking for a reset to send you, but I cannot find any because we don't get a reset every time we pay. Anyway, it is valueless as it does not state the amount paid. It only says that the tax for that year was paid, without stating whether it is 5 centavos, 100 or 1,000 pesos. The residents who ask or get the said reset accept it with closed eyes. The reset has no signature in the place where the amount paid ought to be, although it bears their name. Until now, I cannot comprehend why some are signed and others are not. This is more or less what is happening here in the payment of the land tax, and it has been so for many years since I can remember. Beside this, the taxes on the plants in the fields that are far from the town, like the land in Pansol, are various. The tax on the palay is separate from the tax on maize, munggo, or garlic. There is no limit to this tax, for they fix it themselves. Since July, no one buys sugar, and since June, locusts are all over the town and they are destroying palay and sugar cane, which is what we regret here. The governor gave 50 pesos to pay the catcher of locusts, but when they took them to the town hall, they were paid only 25 cents a cavan and a half. And it seems that the locusts are not decreasing. According to the guests of the residents here, only 300 cavans of locusts have been caught in this town. Many still remain. Though the governor has not sent any more money, the people have not stopped catching them. Mariano Herbosa complained in a letter to Rizal that there was, first of all, the tax of 50 cavans of palay on irrigated rice land, even if it had no water. Corruption and the moral imperative through the lens of Rizal was a tax on land with 6 cavans of seed, which was charged 5 pesos in cash per seed cavan, supposedly fixed. But as Herbosa clarified, the tax was raised if they see that the harvest is good and it is not decreased if the harvest is bad. Next was the tax on dry land planted to sugar, maize, and other crops, which had multiple rates, as did the taxes on residential lots. In all these cases, tax rates were limited only by the whim of the assessor. As a result, taxpayers ended up haggling like they do in buying fishing. Tax resets, in addition, were useless because, as Herbosa explained to Rizal, the reset did not indicate the amount paid by the taxpayer. It only says that the tax for that year has been paid, but does not state whether it is 5 centavos, 25 centavos, 100 pesos, or 1,000 pesos. The residents who get or ask for the said reset accept it with eyes closed. The reset bears their signature, but the tax list of what ought to be paid does not have any signature. Until now, I do not understand the meaning of signing on one and not on the other. That's all. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I'm Shalanda Naga and I'm with Axel Hinares. Our topic is Taxation under the American. The Americans who acquired the Philippines aim to make the economy self-sufficient by running the government with the smallest possible sum of revenue and create surplus in the budget. From 1898 to 1903, the Americans followed the Spanish system of taxation with some modification, noting that the system introduced by the Spanish were outdated and regressive. In 1902, the first civil government was established under William H. Taft. Taft is the 27th President of the United States, the 10th Chief Justice, the only person who held both offices. Later on, the urbana would be replaced by tax on real estate, which became known as land tax. The land tax was levied on both urban and rural real estate. Real property tax is the tax due on real properties in the Philippines. This is assessed by the local government units such as province, city, or municipality. Republic Act Number 7160 or the Local Government Code of the Philippines, specifically Section 197 to 283, governs the power of local government units to impose real property tax. The only problem with land tax was that land titling in rural areas was very disorderly. The appraising of land value was influenced by political and familial factors, and the introduction of a taxation system on agricultural land faced objection from the landed elite. Tax evasion was prevalent, especially among the elite. In other words, the landed people are not doing their responsibility, and that is to pay the tax. And to address that specific problem, the government passed the Internal Revenue Law of 1904. The Internal Revenue Law of 1904 was patterned after the Internal Revenue Law in US. It laid the basic structure of a Bureau of Internal Revenue and levied primarily consumption taxes in the form of specific stamp and poll taxes and sales tax. Described 10 major sources of revenue. License taxes on firms dealing in alcoholic beverages and tobacco. Number 2, the excise taxes on alcoholic beverages and tobacco products. 3. Taxes on banks and bankers. Number 4, document stamp and taxes. Number 5, the cedula. Taxes on insurance and insurance companies. 7. Taxes on forest products. Number 8, mining concessions. 9. Taxes on business and manufacturing. And lastly, occupational licenses. The taxation under Americans will be further explained by Ms. Axel Henares.
Because the rate was fixed for adult male, the cedula underwent revisions under the new statute. This resulted in a significant drop in revenue. In 1907, some provinces were given permission to increase the cedula price in order to fund road building and upkeep. The industrial tax was imposed on the business community and evolved into a complicated system that assigned a specific tax to each industrial or commercial activity. Based on its profitability, the new law also placed a quarterly percentage tax on sales. The Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act was passed in 1913, resulting in decrease in government revenue when export tariffs on sugar, tobacco, hemp, and copra were repealed to compensate for the loss. Then Governor General Francis Porton Harrison advocated for an increase in tax receipts. The 1904 Internal Revenue Act received minor reventions, including the imposition of taxes on mines, petroleum products, and dealers in petroleum goods and tobacco. Later on, more taxation sources were introduced. An income tax was enacted in 1914, an inheritance tax was enacted in 1919, and the National Lottery was formed in 1932. To increase government revenue, these new creations, however, were insufficient to boost government revenue.
Good day everyone, I am Keishal Aikokamas and with my co-partner Miss Lady June Ashbel C. Dihos, and we will discuss the taxation during the Commonwealth period. New measures and legislation were introduced to make a taxation system appear more equitable during the Commonwealth. Income tax rates were increased in 1936, adding a surtax rate on individual net income in excess of 10,000 pesos. Income tax rate of corporation were also increased. Kaya during Commonwealth period, ang income tax rate ay tumaas noong 1936. So, pag sinabi nating surtax rate, ito ay ang pagtaas ng 10% ng karagdagan sa mga nai-apply sa mga high income taxpayers. The cedula tax was abolished, which appeared to be a progressive move, but in 1940, a resident tax was imposed on every citizen aged 18 years old and on every corporation. During speech of President Manuel L. Quezon, the abolished on cedula tax on November 1, 1937. In 1939, the Commonwealth government drafted the National Internal Revenue Code, introducing major changes in the new tax system as follows. First, the normal tax of 3% and the surtax on income was replaced by a single tax at a progressive rate. Second, personal exemptions were reduced. Third, corporation income tax was slightly increased by introducing taxes on inherited estate or gifts donated in the name of dead persons. The cumulative sales tax was replaced by a single turnover tax of 10% on luxuries. Fifth, taxes on liquor, cigarettes, forestry products, and mining were increased. Last, dividends were made taxable. The introduced tax structure was an improvement of the earlier system introduced by the Americans, but still remained equitable. The lower class still felt the bulk of a burden of taxation, while the upper class, the landed elite, or the people in political positions were able to maneuver the situation that would benefit them more. The agriculture sector was still taxed low to promote growth, but there was no incentive for industrial investment to take root and develop.
Thank you, Keishel. So, I am Lady June Ashbel C. Dehos, and now I will add and explain what is taxation during the Commonwealth period.
Taxation during the Commonwealth period.
But first, we need to know the meaning of taxation. Taxation includes authoritative title from the Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators that promote the improvement of tax administration within the Commonwealth, with particular emphasis on tax auditing techniques, combating tax evasion, implementing computerization and IT, and international tax competition. At ating tuklasin ang taxation during the Commonwealth period. Sa wakas, ang karaniwang katangian ng pagbubuwis sa panahon ng pananakop ng mga Amerikano sa Pilipinas ay hindi ginamit upang paiba-ibahin ang ekonomiya o direktang pag-unlad ng ekonomiya dahil dinadala pa rin ng ilang sektor ang hindi katimbang na bahagi ng pasanin sa buwis. Nang marating ang ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig sa baybayin ng Pilipinas, ang aktibidad sa ekonomiya ay nahinto at ang Pilipinas ay umukod sa isang bagong hanay ng mga administrador, ang mga Hapones. Agad na ipinagpatuloy ng administrasyong militar ng Hapon sa Pilipinas noong ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig ang sistema na pangongolekta ng buwis na ipinakilala noong Commonwealth. Ngunit hindi kasama ang artikulong pag-aari ng sandatahang lakas ng Hapon. Bumagsak ang kalakalang panlabas at pangunahing pinagmulan ng pagbubuwis ay nagmula sa libangan, mga paggawaan, propesyon at mga lisensya sa negosyo. Habang sumiklab ang digmaan, ang pangongolekta ng buwis ay isang mahirap na gawain at ang mga karagdagang kita ng gobyerno ay nakuha mula sa mga benta ng national sweepstakes at pagbebenta ng mga buno ng gobyerno. Lumaki ng gusto ang paggagasta ng pamahalaang militar ng Hapon at naglabas sila ng mga tala ng militar upang mabayaran ang mga gastos sa digmaan.
Good morning everyone. So I am Kathy Gausta and today me, Cabanas, Hurtado and Edor will going to discuss the fiscal policy from 1946 to present. The impact of the war on the Philippine economy was effectively disparate, as Manila, the capital, was razed to the ground while the rest of the Philippines was relatively untouched. So, ang epekto ng digmaan sa ekonomiya ng Pilipinas ay epektibong magkaiba dahil ang Manila, ang kabisera, ay nawasak sa lupa habang ang natitirang bahagi ng Pilipinas ay medyo hindi nagalaw. but the highly agriculture-based economy was disrupted. The United States may have declared the Philippines independent, but as the country needed rehabilitation funds from the United States, the dependency of the Philippines to the Americans was an opportunity to be taken advantage of by the former colonial administrators. The economic situation was so problematic that by 1949, there was a severe lack of funds in many aspects of governance, such as the military and education sectors. Nagkaproblema ang sitwasyon sa ekonomiya dahil noong 1949, nagkaroon ng matinding kakulangan ng pondo sa maraming aspeto ng pamamahala, tulad ng militar at sektor ng edukasyon. No efforts were made to improve tax collection, and the United States advised the adoption of direct taxation. The administration of President Manuel Rojas declined the proposal because it did not want to align its allies in Congress. The impetus for economic growth came during the time of President Elpidio Quirino through the implementation of import and exchange controls that led to import substitution development. This policy allowed for the expansion of viable manufacturing sector that reduced economic dependence on imports. New tax measures were also passed, which include higher corporate tax rates that increase government revenues. Tax revenue in 1953 increased twofold compared to 1948, the year when Quirino first assumed presidency. While the succeeding presidencies of Magsaysay, Garcia, and Macapagal promised to study the tax structure and policy of the country through the creation of a tax commission in 1959 by means of Republic Act Number 2211 to make way for a more robust and efficient tax collection scheme. Post-war fiscal policy remained regressive, characterized by the overburdening of the lowest classes, while the landed elite who held business interest were in Congress to ensure the taxes would not be levied to them who belonged to the higher classes of society. The period of the post-war republic also saw a rise in corruption. From 1959 to 1968, Congress did not pass any tax legislation despite important changes in the economy, and the vested interests of Filipino businessmen in Congress would manifest in many instances, such as the rejection of taxes on imports. Indirect taxation still contributed to 3/4 of tax revenues, and the Omnibus Tax Law of 1969 did not increase the ratio of income tax to general tax revenue. Collection of taxes remained poor. Tax structure was still problematic, and much of the public funds were lost to corruption, which left the government incapable of funding projects geared toward development.
Under the Marcos authoritarian regime, the tax system remained regressive, meaning to say taking a proportionally greater amount from those on lower incomes. During the latter part of the Marcos years, from 1981 to 1985, the tax system was still heavily dependent on indirect taxes, which made up 70% of the total tax collection. The tax system also remained unresponsive. Taxes grew at an average annual rate of 15% and generated a low tax yield. Tax effort defined as the ratio between the share of the actual tax collection in the gross domestic product and predictable taxable capacity was at low 10.7%. As Corazon Aquino took the helm of the government after the EDSA revolution, she reformed the tax system through the 1986 Tax Reform Program. The aim was to improve the responsiveness of the tax system, promote equity by ensuring that similarly situated individuals and firms bear the same tax burden, promote growth by withdrawing or modifying taxes that reduce incentives to work or produce, and improve tax administration by simplifying the tax system and promoting tax compliance. A major reform in the tax system introduced under the term of Aquino was the introduction of value-added tax, or the VAT, with the following features. 1. Uniform rate of 10% on sale of domestic and imported goods and services and 0% on exports and foreign currency denominated sales. 2. 10% in lieu of varied rates applicable to fixed taxes, 60 nominal rates, advance sales tax, tax on original sale, subsequent sales tax, compensating tax, miller's tax, contractor's tax, broker's tax, film lessor and distributor's tax, excise tax on solvents and matches, and excise tax on processed videotapes. 3. 2% tax on entities with annual sales or receipt of less than 5,200,000. 4. Adoption of tax credit method of calculating tax by subtracting the tax on inputs from tax on gross sales. 5. Exemption of sale of basic commodities such as agriculture and marine food products in their original state, price-regulated petroleum products, and fertilizers. 6. Additional 20% tax on the non-essential articles such jewelry, perfumes, toilet waters, yacht, and other vessels for pleasure and sports. The VAT law was signed in 1986 and put to effect in 1988. While it was a reliable source of revenue for the government, new tax laws would reduce its reliability as legislated exemptions grew.
Along with tax reform came the administrative reforms, such as the restructuring of the Department of Finance and its attached agency, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR, through the Executive Order 127. Tax collection and tax audits were intensified, computerization was introduced, and corruption was relatively reduced, which improved the trust in the BIR in general. As a result of the tax reform of the Aquino administration, both tax and revenue effort rose, increasing from 10.7% in 1985 to 15.4% in 1992. Greater political stability during the administration of Fidel Ramos in 1992 allowed for continued economic growth. The Ramos administration ventured into its own tax reform program in 1997 through the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program, which was implemented to first make the tax system broad-based, simple, and with reasonable tax rates. Second, minimize tax avoidance allowed by existing flaws and loopholes in the system. Third, encourage payments by increasing tax exemptions levels, lowering the highest tax rates, and simplifying procedure. And lastly, rationalize the grant of tax incentives, which was estimated to be worth 531.7 billion pesos in 1994. The VAT base was also broadened in 1997 to include services through Republic Act 7716. The features of the improved VAT law were as follows. First, restore the VAT exemptions for all cooperatives such as agricultural, electric, credit, or multipurpose, and others, provided that the share capital of each member does not exceed to 515,000 pesos. Second, expanded the coverage of the term simple processes, meaning by including broiling and roasting, effectively narrowing the tax base for food products. Third, expanded the coverage of the term original state by including molasses. Fourth, exempted from the VAT are the following: importation of meat, sale or importation of coal and natural gas in whatever form or state, educational services rendered by private educational institutions duly accredited by the Commission on Higher Education or CHED, house and lot and other residential dwellings valued at 51 million and below, subject to adjustment using the Consumer Price Index or CPI. Lease of residential units with monthly rental per unit of not more than 58,000 subject to adjustment using CPI. And lastly, sale, importation, printing, or publication of books and any newspaper.
The succeeding term of President Joseph Estrada in 1998 was too short to constitute any change in the tax system. Then, Vice President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was swept to power through another EDSA revolution. As president, she undertook increased government spending without adjusting tax collections. This resulted in large deficits from 2002 to 2004. The government had to look for additional source of revenue, and in 2005, the expanded value-added tax or EVAT was signed into law as Republic Act 9337. This expanded the VAT base, subjecting to VAT energy products such as coal and petroleum products and electricity generation, transmissions, and distribution. Select professional services were also taxed. In February 2006, the VAT tax rate was also increased from 10% to 12%. As President Benigno Aquino III succeeded President Arroyo in 2010, he promised that no new taxes would be imposed and additional revenue would have to come from adjusting existing taxes. The administration ventured into the adjustment of excise tax and liquor and cigarette of the sin tax reform, motivation for which was primarily fiscal, public health, and social order related considerations. Republic Act 10351 was passed and government revenues from alcohol and tobacco excise taxes increased. Collections from tobacco and alcohol in 2015 made up 1.1% of the gross domestic product, and the improvement in tax collection resulted in the Philippines receiving a credit rating upgrade into an investment grade status. The sin tax reform was an exemplar on how tax reform could impact social services, as it allowed for the increase of the Department of Health budget or triple in 2015, and free health insurance premiums for the poor people enrolled in PhilHealth increased from 55.2 million in 2012 to 515.4 million in 2015. The administration of the new President Rodrigo Duterte promised tax reform, particularly in income taxes, as it vowed to lower income tax rates shouldered by working Filipinos. The present income tax scheme of the country is the second highest in Southeast Asia, and the current laws on income taxes were outdated as they were drafted 2 decades ago. The proposed tax reform also seeks to limit VAT exemptions and increase excise taxes on petroleum products and automobiles. It is hoped that reforms in the country tax policy will result in the much desired economic development that will be felt even by the lowest classes in society. That's all. Thank you.